you do admit, sir, that Pakistan has had a long history of backing and supporting and training and funding these terrorist organizations.
Well, we have been doing this dirty work for the United States for about 3 decades, and West, including Britain.
We are different from the Hindus in every possible aspect of life. Our religion is different. Our customs are different. Our traditions are different. Our thoughts are different. Our ambitions are different.
The Pahalgam terrorist attack represents the largest number of civilian casualties since the horrific 26/11 Mumbai attacks in 2008. Having been a victim of cross-border terrorism for decades, India fully understands the long-lasting impact such acts have on victims, their families, and society.
As Ghazwa-e-Hind, which is the Pakistani groups use it. Ghazwa is actually just as Jihad is the war, a holy war or war for religious purposes. Ghazwa is a battle, and there's ostensibly a saying of Prophet Muhammad that that before the end times, the final biggest war between good and evil and between Islam and Kufr is going to take place in Hind, which is India, which is the land east of the river Indus. Americans pay a lot of attention to their own end time prophecies, but getting into that whole theater, they have totally neglected this. It means a lot to people who believe in it.
Please don't forget the story of Pakistan.
The recent terror attack in Pahalgam, well, it was truly tragic. 28 Indian civilians losing their lives. And the details reported, being asked about their religion, asked to recite the Kalma. It really brings the horror of terrorism right back to the forefront.
It really does. And it serves as a very stark starting point for our deep dive today. We're looking closely at quite a compelling article published on TICE.
Right, and this article argues pretty forcefully that Pakistan is effectively the epicenter of global terrorism.
Exactly. And this TICE piece, it's not just, throwing out an opinion. It builds a very detailed case, a serious argument, drawing on a whole range of events, statements, even international reports.
So our goal here is to really unpack what the article is claiming, look at the evidence it puts forward, and think about the implications if these arguments, well, if they hold water.
Yeah, we want to get beyond just a summary. We're trying to really understand the core perspective here, the reasoning behind it.
Okay, so let's start where the TICE article does with that Pahalgam attack. The way it's described is quite chilling, isn't it?
It is. 28 tourists, seemingly singled out because they were Hindu, that demand to recite the Kalma. The article frames it very clearly.
Not just random violence, but a deliberate, religiously motivated act. A massacre, as the article puts it.
Precisely. And the article uses this very immediate tragedy to sort of launch its wider argument. It suggests this isn't an isolated incident, but maybe a symptom of something deeper, something rooted in Pakistan's approach to extremism, according to the article's view.
And that central argument is, well, it doesn't mince words. It says Pakistan has, over something like 4 decades, industrialized terror. That's quite an image.
What a powerful phrase. The article argues that what it calls Pakistan's military intelligence complex, meaning the army and the ISI working closely together, has actively nurtured extremist groups, trained fighters, and used terrorism basically as a strategic tool.
As foreign policy, essentially.
That's the argument. It paints this picture of a state deeply involved in promoting terror way beyond its own borders.
And the geographic reach the TICE article claims for this influence is huge. It talks about a line from Kashmir and Kabul all the way to places like Tehran, Moscow, London, even New York.
Yeah, a vast network, allegedly.
Yeah.
And what makes the article particularly interesting, I think, is how it tries to back this up. It doesn't just make claims. It points to specific examples and even, admissions from within Pakistan itself.
Right, that's key. It highlights Nawaz Sharif's statement back in 2018 about Pakistan's role in the 2008 Mumbai attacks, Lashkar-e-Taiba carrying those out.
Exactly. Sharif's comments, whatever the context was back then, were quite rare. A former leader acknowledging involvement in such a major attack. The TICE article uses that to sort of challenge the official denials over the years.
And then there's Pervez Musharraf. The article brings up his confirmation about training terrorists to go into Jammu and Kashmir, explicitly saying it was for strategic leverage.
Yes, another striking quote the article uses. Musharraf basically confirming what many had accused Pakistan of for years, using these non-state groups for foreign policy aims. The article presents it as, More proof of a deliberate state policy.
And it doesn't stop with former leaders. The Tice piece also mentions the current defense minister, Khawaja Mohammad Asif, who apparently admitted recently that Islamabad backed terror groups for 3 decades, though he framed it as a policy error tied to U.S. interests.
That's right. The article definitely flags that admission. It sees it as finally pulling back the curtain on decades of denial, suggesting that even now there's some acknowledgement, even if it's couched as a past mistake.
Okay, so after laying out that groundwork, the article then moves into specific case studies, doesn't it? Places where it argues Pakistan's role in exporting extremism is visible. Afghanistan seems like a major focus.
It is. The alleged ISI involvement in destabilizing Afghanistan, supporting groups like the Haqqani Network, giving sanctuary to the Taliban leadership. The article is very direct about this.
It paints the ISI as a key player, training and funding groups that caused chaos for years.
And it cites specific attacks, like the 2008 Indian embassy bombing in Kabul, the 2011 U.S. embassy siege, presenting them as having the signature of ISI-backed terror.
There's also that quote included from Carlotta Gall saying these attacks were sanctioned and monitored by the most senior officials in Pakistani intelligence. That adds another layer, doesn't it?
It does. Gall's reporting from the region is extensive, so her findings lend considerable weight to the article's narrative about state sponsorship.
Then the article makes a connection that might surprise some people, linking the 2024 Moscow concert hall attack, suggesting ideological or logistical ties back to Pakistan-based networks.
Yeah, that's a significant claim. The article suggests this extremist ideology, it argues, is fostered in Pakistan, isn't staying put, that it's spreading, into Central Asia, maybe even Europe. It fits the article's theme of Pakistan as a source of global jihadist influence.
And then there's Iran. The article talks about the Sunni group Jaish-ul-Adl, operating from Pakistan, attacking Iranian forces.
Right, and it points to Iran's response, those missile strikes inside Balochistan, as evidence of Tehran's frustration and their view of where the problem originates.
It certainly shows the regional tensions fueled by these groups operating across borders.
The Tice article uses it as another example of what it portrays as Pakistan's failure, or perhaps unwillingness, to control extremists on its soil.
The article even reaches back to the 2005 London bombings. It notes that 3 of the bombers apparently spent time in Pakistani madrasas and training camps.
Yes, absorbing extremist ideology, allegedly with ISI oversight, according to the article. This links Pakistan directly to attacks much further afield.
It really illustrates the article's point about radicalization happening there and then being exported effectively.
Exactly, supporting that claim of global reach.
And, of course, you can't discuss this topic without mentioning Osama bin Laden. The article points out he was found in Abbottabad, right near Pakistan's main military academy.
A huge point. The lingering questions about how he could live there undetected, or perhaps sheltered. The article definitely highlights the implications regarding potential ISI knowledge or even complicity. It really strengthens the core argument about state involvement, or at least willful ignorance.
The article also touches upon Bangladesh. It mentions alleged ISI financial and logistical support for Jamaat-ul-Mujahideen Bangladesh, JMB.
And connects that to the awful Gulshan Cafe attack in Dhaka in 2016.
So it's broadening the scope again, suggesting a pattern across South Asia, not just focused on India or Afghanistan.
That seems to be the intention, yes, to show a wider web of influence.
And there was that detail from a 2020 intelligence report mentioned. Quite disturbing, alleging ISI involvement in training Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh via JMB.
With plans to infiltrate India, supposedly funded by Gulf-based NGOs, again with alleged ISI oversight, the article interprets this report as painting a picture of a really sophisticated long-term strategy using proxies and even aid groups.
Moving on, the article talks specifically about the paracamps inside Pakistan, describing them not just as hideouts, but as well-oiled factories of jihad.
Located across different regions, Punjab, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, Waziristan, Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, and it lists specific groups allegedly trained there.
Groups like Lashkar-e-Taiba, Jaish-e-Mohammed, Hizbul Mujahideen, even ISIS-K.
And crucially, it alleges that former Pakistani military and ISI officers are often involved in overseeing this training.
Which, if true, directly ties it back to the state apparatus again, doesn't it? It suggests it's not just rogue elements, but something more structured.
That's precisely the article's assertion, that it's a state-supported enterprise.
A very, very serious charge. And the article claims this reality is, quote, recognized worldwide, even if it's often denied at home.
It backs this up by citing things like the U.S. State Department's 2019 report calling Pakistan a safe haven for terrorists.
And that description from the European Foundation for South Asian Studies, the triad of terror involving the military, ISI, and extremist clerics.
These international perspectives are used to lend external weight to the article's claims, suggesting a degree of consensus among some observers.
The article even includes that striking admission from Brigadier Shah back in 2019, apparently on Pakistani TV, saying the government spent millions to mainstream Jamaat-ud-Dawa,
which is widely seen as the political front for Lashkar-e-Taiba.
Yeah. And then Musharraf's comments describing figures like bin Laden, Zawahiri, and Haqqani as heroes. The article presents that as, well, a pretty chilling glimpse into a certain mindset.
These kinds of insider statements, as highlighted in the article, really work to undermine the narrative that Pakistan is purely a victim of terror, according to the piece's argument.
So given all this evidence it lays out, what's the conclusion? What's the call to action from the Tice article? It sounds quite uncompromising. Extremely.
It argues the world needs to stop seeing Pakistan as just a complex ally. It explicitly calls for designating Pakistan as a state sponsor of terrorism.
And suggests concrete actions.
Yes, things like sanctions, blacklisting by international bodies like FATF, and diplomatic isolation. Holding the country accountable, essentially.
It also takes a shot at the UN, doesn't it? Criticizing the failure to blacklist groups like LeT and JeM because of geopolitical maneuvering, like vetoes.
It does. It points to the complexities of international politics and expresses frustration with what it sees as a lack of decisive action, despite the evidence presented.
So the article's final word is really a warning, isn't it? That this isn't just a regional problem, but a global crisis.
Absolutely. It stresses the spread of what it calls the ideology of jihad, bred in Pakistan, and warns that the cycle of violence will just continue unless the international community directly confronts this alleged terror infrastructure.
A very stark conclusion.
It leaves you with a very firm message, urging the world to recognize the global stakes and, well, to act decisively.
Okay, so to wrap up our deep dive into this Tice article, it presents a really comprehensive and frankly troubling argument. It contends that Pakistan has this long, deep history of sponsoring and exporting terrorism, backing this up with specific attacks, insider comments, international reports, a whole range of points.
It really does lay out a detailed case.
And considering this argument, this evidence marshaled by the Tice article, it makes you think, doesn't it? What are the potential long-term consequences of the world's current approach to Pakistan? And based on the claims made here, are there maybe different strategies, different approaches that might be more effective in actually tackling the roots of global terrorism?
Definitely leaves you with a lot to consider. The complexities are immense, and the article certainly puts forward a very strong, very specific perspective on a critical issue.
As the UN Security Council in its statement has said, perpetrators, organizers, financiers, and sponsors of reprehensible acts of terrorism must be held accountable and brought to justice. Acts of terrorism are criminal and unjustifiable, regardless of their motivation, wherever, whenever, and by whomever committed. We reiterate that terrorism in all its forms must be condemned unequivocally. The establishment of the Victims of Terrorism Association is a significant step in this regard. It will create a structured, safe space for victims to be heard and supported. India believes that initiatives like VOTAN are essential to strengthening the global response to terrorism, ensuring that victims remain at the center of our collective efforts.